Bethany Funk has information material to charges against Mr. Kohlberger. She was interviewed by police on several occasions. She disclosed things she heard and things she saw. Portions of information Ms. Funk has is exculpatory to the defendant. Ms. Funk's information is unique to her experiences and cannot be provided by another witness. Bethany Funk, BF. What information do you have? What material do you have? BF, what does BK want from you? What did you see? Brian Kohlberger didn't say he wants to speak to Dylan, DM. He said, you, Bethany Funk. He's actually even said that the information Bethany Funk has will exonerate him. So, Bethany Funk, what did you see? What did you hear? Were you asleep? Were you awake? Were you on a date with Brian Kohlberger, allegedly? Because this is for entertainment purpose only. I'm just thinking loudly to myself. Help me here, guys. Miss Funk has seen something. She has material. She has portions of information. Why is the prosecution and the police and the FBI sealing our fight? That isn't fair to Brian Kohlberger. That isn't fair in getting justice for the victims either. Did BF walk up and see what happened? Did she witness who the alleged killer was? Because Brian Kohlberger seems to know Bethany Funk. He didn't ask for DM. So, Miss Funk, what do you know? I hope that comes up in the quote. That means she has some crucial information. Miss Funk's information is unique to experiences and cannot be provided by another witness.
Let's get into the Brian Kohlberger case, because this is something we haven't focused on in a little bit, and we really should. As we know, the 28-year-old former criminology student is charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary in connection with the brutal slayings of 4 University of Idaho students back in November of 2022. Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And we are all anticipating what the prosecution is going to present in Kohlberger's upcoming preliminary hearing, which is scheduled for the week of June 26th. As we know, preliminary hearings are the opportunity for the prosecution to present evidence of probable cause that he committed these crimes, all in support of these charges, also that this case can ultimately proceed to trial. That's the purpose of a preliminary hearing. This is the prosecution's burden to basically show their hand. But as we know, the defense can cross-examine these witnesses, the state's witnesses, maybe even present their own evidence, so it's really interesting. So as we wait for all that, there have now been some recent developments that I want to get into. And that brings me right now to retired FBI agent and attorney Bobby Chacon. Bobby, so good to see you. Friend of the program. Haven't seen you on Sidebar in quite some time, so it's good to have you back.
It's good to be back, Jesse. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so let's start with the major development. The major development regarding Bethany Funk. Bethany Funk was one of the 2 surviving roommates in that house. She was in the house when the killings happened in the early morning hours of November 13th. Now, Kohberger's defense originally subpoenaed her to appear at the preliminary hearing, but then both sides agreed to quash that subpoena because Funk has agreed to be interviewed by the defense in Reno, Nevada, where she lives. Now, the question is, why do they want to speak with her? Well, according to an affidavit that was filed by the defense's criminal investigator, Richard Batanti, wrote, quote, Bethany Funk has information material to the charges against Mr. Kohberger. She was interviewed by police on several occasions. She disclosed things she heard and things she saw. Portions of information Ms. Funk has is exculpatory to the defendant. Ms. Funk's information is unique to her experiences and cannot be provided by another witness. Wow. Okay, so Bobby, as we know, exculpatory means information that would show Brian Kohberger's innocent. What do you make of that?
Well, yes, it does. That's exactly what exculpatory means. However, the interpretation of whether a piece of testimony is exculpatory or not is very open to interpretation. And so while the investigators say she has things or stuff that is exculpatory to Brian Kohberger, that's their interpretation of that, whatever that be. So arguably, in a case like this, in this case in particular, she is probably the most important witness. She's the only living eyewitness, if you want to call her an eyewitness, to the crimes that happened. So she.
Well. Also, we have Dylan Mortensen, who's the other surviving roommate. She's the one who allegedly saw the killer. So it's that's a whole separate issue.
Both of these people in the house are really the only 2 eyewitnesses, so to speak. And so the defense is going to want to get into them as much as they can. They want to, what we call dirty them up if they can at trial, and anything that they can get to before trial helps them. So any statement, as part of the discovery process, that the defense gets all of the statements that this witness has made to the police, in any way. And so they've reviewed those statements now, and they want to talk more at length about those things to this witness before cross-examination, because I've had it where in my own statements where defense litigators will get into the littlest detail that you give and try to make you give an inconsistent statement prior to trial, so they can bring that out at trial as an inconsistent statement and maybe look like your memory is bad or you're lying or you really don't know what you're talking about. That's particularly important in cases of like height. I've seen it done in height where the witness will say the guy was about 5'8", and then the police say, well, could he have been 5'8" or 5'10"? And the person says, well, yeah, he could have been 5'8", 5'9", 5'10" in that area. And then the defense says, well, if he could have been 5'8" or 5'10", could he have been 6 foot or 6'1"? And then you've got somebody from 5'8" to 6'1", and they dirty up a witness that way, and then the witness's recollection looks really unreliable. And so in this case, I think what they want to do is they want to get into some of the details of what they told police and try to create seemingly inconsistencies.
I really don't understand that the courts and the lawyers have their way of going back and forth with the witness and trying to, like Bobby said, the former FBI, trying to get them to say something that they haven't said. But then there's an important question here. Bethany Funk, BF, and DM, Dylan Mortensen, brought doubts on their own self and on the whole situation. The reason I say that is I know people deal with shock, flight, fight, and freeze mode. As a mental health counselor, I would definitely know that. And yes, it exists. Our body and our brains act and react in a in a different way when you're in shock. But then what I don't understand is, this is my personal opinion only, you saw a man that doesn't belong to the house. You heard strange noises. You heard the dog barking. You thought you heard Kaylee playing with a dog. In the affidavit, it says that Dylan heard somebody that sounded like Kaylee saying there's somebody here. And then you witness someone in black clothing telling Xana, may she rest in peace, that don't worry, I'm here to help you. The figure passes you by. Whether he sees you or he doesn't see you, you decide to lock your room and text or call Bethany, allegedly. 8 hours goes by and you just fall asleep like nothing happened. While you know you heard disturbing things. How does that make sense? Because besides flight, fight, freeze mode, you actually have somebody who doesn't belong in the house with black clothing, bushy eyebrows, and it was quite dark, so I don't even understand how that was a thing that DM noticed. But yet again, you've noticed all those things, but you decide, you know what, let me call it a night. I'm drunk or I'm high or whatever, let me fall asleep. And then 8 hours later, I get up and I decide to call the Sigma Chi boys. Strange. Never knew that they were 911 or they were the police or that they could protect them. That sounds like a red flag to me. Let's not forget Kaylee Congalvis' friend told ABC News that she found out about the murders at 10 a.m. She called Kaylee's phone. It went straight to answering machine. I wonder if it was switched off by whoever did this. So why would DM and BF call half of the college students before they call 911? It's something Ann Taylor would definitely be asking. I've heard, this is speculations here, I've heard many people saying that, oh, it's because DM was high and she was intoxicated and she couldn't call the cops because she had things she had to get out of the house. 8 hours? Was she getting a shipment out of the house? Allegedly? It doesn't make sense. Because the first thing you would do is call 911 because there is an intruder, there's a killer in your house. Trigger warning, somebody who doesn't belong there.
Exculpatory is kind of that big word. I mean, it makes you say, basically saying, oh, we can definitively prove that he didn't do it. There's another suspect. We don't know. I mean, exculpatory is the word that they chose. We know that her camp, when they were fighting the subpoena, basically said, quote, that this is without support, there's no further information or detail, and they're basically kind of, watering down what information she has. But here's what we do know. Bobby, that she and this other roommate, Dylan Mortensen, were inside that residence at the time of the killings, that they were roommates to the victims. We believe that Ms. Funk was in the first floor bedroom. According to the probable cause affidavit that came out when they ultimately arrested Brian Kohberger, according to Funk, she saw Ethan Chapin and Zana Kernodle at a fraternity house from approximately 9 p.m. on November 12th to 1:45 a.m. on November 13th. She also estimated that at approximately 1:45, both Chapin and Kernodle returned to the residence. She also stated that Chapin didn't live in the King Road residence, which we know he was a guest of Kernodle. And she also said, or was also said in this probable cause affidavit, that Funk and Mortensen both told police that the other occupants of the home returned back November 13th at around 2 a.m. and that they were asleep or at least in their rooms by approximately 4 a.m. But there's one other thing. In the probable cause affidavit, apparently police reviewed forensic downloads from Funk's phone and determined that the homicides occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. So that's important information about the timeline. Remember, according to this criminal investigator, that whatever information Funk has, it's unique to her. Is there anything about that, the fact that she's so instrumental in putting the timeline, that the defense is trying to chip away at? Because if they can say the killings didn't happen at these times, or her timeline's wrong, that may help Brian Kohberger.
Sure, it may help him, but it's hard to see how that could be exculpatory. In other words, unless they're prepared to prove that Brian Kohberger was somewhere else at that time, if they can say, oh, well, it must have happened between here and here, but we have proof that Brian was over here at that time, that can conceivably be exculpatory. But oftentimes the defense will say something like, well, this proves that there might have been somebody else in the house or something like that. And that's not necessarily exculpatory. If there was somebody else involved in the crime, that's not necessarily exculpatory to this defendant. They might be trying to say that, you have video of his Elantra in a certain place at a certain time, and if the crimes happened here, how could he have been in that house when his Elantra is on video over here at that time? So they're trying to play with the timeline, and they may think they have something like that where if you're saying this is him and this Elantra, which we're going to say it is, well then the times don't match because the Elantra's on video over here. And now I don't agree that that's what the timeline shows, but that may be the line that they're going down.
I find this to be very interesting. Could it be possible that Bethany Funk knew where Brian Christopher Kohberger was that night? Would that make sense? Because she has something, a portion or material that is unique compared to DM. So was Brian maybe talking to Bethany? Or was she a witness to where he was? The reason I have to say this mindfully. The reason I do not believe BF and DM is if they did what was right as lawful, obedient citizens and called 911 immediately, oh, it's okay. Don't even call 911 immediately. Just say you were in shock. What about calling 911 in 3 hours' time, 5 hours' time? And then on top of that, they managed to call the Sigma boys, Hunter Johnson, Ethan, his brother, may rest in peace. They called the whole world except the police. The police were the last people to find out. In fact, 911, the ambulance was the first ones notified after the multiple people came and called 911. Another thing that I don't understand is, I'm a mental health counselor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the medical field there who could answer this. Wouldn't you notice the difference between an unconscious person and a person who has been bleeding out, trigger warning, for 8 hours? I believe that DM and BF have crucial information. And Ann Taylor has every right to bring them up. Another thing is, if they were genuine about their testaments, the prosecution would have let them spoke. They wouldn't have sealed the files and subpoenaed it and all this. Why? Everyone's entitled to a fair trial. Up to today, I've never said that I don't believe that BK hasn't done the crime. I'm not saying that BK has done it either. I'm just saying, show us the proof. There's so many things that are missing in this puzzle that until the trial starts and until they're genuine with the trial, now we have the prosecutor, Thompson, and his crew fighting against cameras to be brought in the court. We had big profile highlighted cases like O.J. Simpson, Juice. When Juice's trial started, the whole world was watching. We've had the Murdoch case, Alex Murdoch. Why did they want to keep this case out of the camera? Why is the prosecution not forthcoming? Everyone's entitled to a fair trial. I hope that BF, DM, Hunter Johnson, the multiple people who called the 911, the grub truck people, the Banfield alcohol minor video, all those people involved, Saeed with the bushy eyebrows, everyone needs to come in. One by one. Because Ann Taylor has every right to find out what exactly happened that day. It doesn't take 8 hours to call the police.
Information she has that may ultimately lead them toward another path. Whatever she says, okay, now we know where we can find additional evidence that maybe we want to show at a preliminary hearing. Maybe we don't need Bethany Funk anymore to testify at a preliminary hearing, but she can give us information and evidence that we can then present. You think that's what's going on here for that interview in Nevada?
Well, I think it's possible. It's also unusual. I mean, look, the defense usually gets all the statements from a witness, and then the first chance they get, I mean, depositions are generally the purview of a civil trial because most judges want civil trials to settle.
Oh, sorry, he's on mute. Bobby. Bobby has always something interesting to say.
Trial always concerned me and prosecutors that I work with, because the more statements a witness gives, the more chance something is going to look inconsistent or contradictory. And so we always try to lock our witnesses into statements and then just lock them down and give no more statements. Don't talk to the press. Don't do anything that's going to maybe compromise the statements you've already given, particularly in the grand jury, because that's sworn statements. That's a sworn testimony. and then you always get a witness confronted by the defense by their grand jury testimony. If their grand jury testimony doesn't exactly match up to their trial testimony, then they start to pick at those differences. So yeah, I think that I don't know what else she could give them as far as leads that lead them to other things. I think you're right. I think the only thing that is going to be the timeline. They're going to try to pick up.
I think another thing that Bethany Funk can give them is actually the timeline, the correct timeline of Eaton Chapin and Xana Konodal. I remember Xana Konodal's father saying that Xana spoke to him around 12 midnight and she said she was going to order pizza and stay at home. Those phone records will be pulled up. And if that is the case, either Xana, may she rest in peace, wasn't being truthful to her dad, which I doubt, or Xana was at home eating pizza, like she told her dad. That means she wouldn't be in the Sigma Chi. But according to Bethany Funk, she said that Xana and Eaton, may they rest in peace, were at the Sigma Chi from 9 at night to 1:45. So who's lying there? The police were very interested in the timelines of Xana Konodal and Eaton Chapin. They weren't interested of the timelines of Madison Morgan and Kaylee Congalvis. So I believe BF knows something. And I believe Ann Taylor knows something that she's pulling her up for. Could it be that the crimes took place, the killings took place between 3 to 4 and now 4 to 4:30? It's Brian Christopher Kohlberger who wants to speak to Bethany Funk. So he would know exactly why he wants to speak to Bethany. Brian, did Bethany knew where you were? By any chance? Pay attention. Brian Kohlberger and Ann Taylor are not interested in Dylan Mortensen. Possibly maybe they know that Dylan Mortensen, to get Dylan Mortensen, they have to get through Bethany Funk. That's what I believe. Because I believe the two girls' statements are different from each other. And have you all noticed the crime scene pictures? You see the police or the forensic team taking pictures of down the steps from the living room to Bethany's room. So what was going on? If these two girls, I really believe they are victims. They could be victims, obviously. But I'm not convinced because it doesn't take 8 hours to call 911. No, actually, it didn't even take them 8 hours to call 911. They called Hunter Johnson, Eaton's brother, guys from the Sigma Chi, because, I don't know why, is it because they're in the ambulance crew? Or they know how to deal with wounds? Imagine getting up, just say if you're Dylan and you fell asleep even, of the shock and you were high or drunk, whatever, the smell of the blood, the officer said, was reeking out of the house. You have 4 people deceased. Trigger warning. Are these two girls trying to tell us that the smell didn't bother them? The only way I can see it is, I'm really sorry to say, but I like to be honest. Maybe they weren't scared of the killer. I'm not saying the killer is Brian Koberger. It could be anyone. Because besides genealogical DNA and besides 3 unidentified male DNA, I don't see any proper roadmaps. I'm sure they have their roadmaps. Let the court start and we'll see what they've got. But if I was Dylan and BF and I went and locked my room door and texted my other roommate, the only surviving roommate, how about that? And then went to sleep like nothing happened. And the next day decided to call half of the students in the college. And then 911. And say, oh, an unconscious person is here. Not a person who's bleeding out. We saw, I hate to say this, it's heartbreaking, but we saw the blood leaking from Xana's room. May they rest in peace. So what do these 2 roommates know? Please leave a comment and let me know. I understand that they're victims or witness. I don't know which ones they're yet. But we'll find out. Like, share, and subscribe. Have a lovely weekend. Condolences to all the 4 victims' families. May correct justice be served. Rest in peace, Sana Conodal. Rest in peace, Eaton Chapin. Rest in peace, Madison Morgan. And rest in peace, Kaylee Congalvis.